Lo-fi videos. We all know them. Whether you want to relax, concentrate, or sleep, these videos do their job really well. And most of them have really cozy places and art styles that make you say internally, I want to be there. So I decided to make this an interactive experience, a lo-fi game. But what could make a game be lo-fi if the term is to describe music? First, it needs to have a similar purpose. When I look for a lo-fi YouTube video, most of the time I want to reset my mind, to rest from the high pace of daily life and social media. It also needs to give a similar feeling. That's why most of these videos have similar art styles that even branches to other types of music, like piano or jazz playlists. Another important thing is that the music uses a good amount of repetition, which helps to avoid distractions when you're listening while doing something else. So, in the next 3 videos, I'm going to make a game that has the atmosphere, the art style, and the perfect gameplay loop that makes you feel like you want to be there. This video is going to be about the visuals, how I got from this to this. Then the programming logic, then music, menus, etc. Video games are normally developed the other way around, where you start with the functionality and later you add the visual elements. But because whatever you decide to do first is not going to simplify any part of the process, and it's more visually appealing to prototype with appealing models, let's start with the 3D models. I started with some train tracks as the game is going to be located at a train station. We're starting with a simple model and we repeat it to make a longer track. For the building that's going to be at the end of the track, I began to make the front windows, which was basically adding rectangles until you get the desired detail. Then I added temporary colors and lighting to see if we were going in the right direction. After this, I added some decorations and a second set of windows on the other side to make the building less lonely. Nothing really special until now. Now the first real challenge started at this point, making the train. It's going to be one of the main eye catches of this game, and it has some tricky things to model. Smooth edges, separate windscreen, large connected parts, and holes. I planned where the windows were going to be before anything else to make sure the topology remained clean. Which means that we do everything we can to keep all the faces as quads and avoiding triangles or n-gons. This is to have the best results in how the model looks and ease to work. Now that I had the main loops planned out, I began to add more rounded details. After rounding the top, you can see why adding rounded edges are a threat to good topology. But as the faces were planned out before, we can clean it up a bit easier. Next, with the front faces clean, I added inclinations. For the windows, as it was one of the last details to add, I ended up using some n-gons, as the alternative would have been too complicated and would have made the model unnecessarily heavy. After that, I added some details to the bottom and the top and a wire above the train. Before adding more things to the train, let's make sure that it will look good in Unity. The main goal of the visuals is to have a hand-drawn look, with mostly solid colors and lines. It's one of the most unique styles that have never been seen before in a video game, especially in Unity. To get the desired look, we will need to use a shader. If you haven't heard of shaders, they're scripts of code that run on the GPU. In graphics, they can control how an object is drawn on screen, using variables like light, how far from the camera the object is, angles, and countless other variables. Another type of shader is the screen space shaders, which run for every pixel of an image. Shaders are one of the most confusing types of code, and to be honest, I still believe that nobody fully understands them. You need to dedicate your life to it, and probably still not get it. So here's what I understand. As we want to make tweaks to the rendering, we're going to use a calculation of some sort with the use of external information, depth, normals, etc., and output the value of a pixel. As all the pixels get calculated, we end up with a new, modified image. To use a screen space shader, I created one and added it to the render stack. Inside the shader, I added a custom function where we can use any kind of algorithm to get a specific result. As we want an outline shader, we can use an algorithm for that. In this specific situation, as shaders are pretty new to me, I needed help from AI to get an edge detection algorithm based on solid gradient and max diff sampling. I think this is a good use for AI, as a programmer isn't expected to be able to read scientific papers with heavy math and be able to translate that to a shader. But I want to make a disclaimer for any process that does require AI. Another thing to mention is I designed this implementation to work for any other algorithm. It's possible to just swap to a different algorithm if desired in the future. With that aside, I got these results. There's also another cool filter called anisotropic Kuwahara. I saw it on a video, but after a couple of days I couldn't make it work. To make the object be shaded as solid colors, another shader was needed. This one was a shader for the objects, and those ones were easier to implement. Instead of adding it to the render stack, we just made the graph, then a material, and specified the shader graph on the material, then added it to the object. Now that we're done with the shaders, let's go back to modeling. This is the train. It looks pretty decent, but what if we separate each part and make them round? And add details like pipes and small lights. And what if we make the windscreen round? And add a huge metallic thing that trains tend to have. Now we have a cool looking train. To complete the environment, I added more vibey objects, like a cool looking vending machine that kind of gives Japanese vibes with random metallic objects. Cool light posts that I had to make them make sense when the references are drawings that don't respect the laws of physics, and vegetation, which is pretty much gambling if the result is going to look good because you cannot go back without losing a ton of work. I like vegetation. Vegetation is very tricky to implement as it is a very organic object in real life with tons of details and leaves, and we can't do that with modeling, especially in video games. I've tried it before and it's not good for performance. So the way vegetation works in video games is that we make a texture with a bunch of detail, like leaves, and we use the alpha channel, visual with RGBA, to make a mask of what is opaque and what is transparent, leaving us with the detail we want, and then duplicate it until we get enough leaves. I made one texture for cherry blossoms and one for bushes. Then made the trunk of the tree, first modeling the general shape, then adding more vertices and using sculpting brushes to make it more organic, and finally adding the leaves. I'm not totally satisfied with the result, but I needed to keep going. When modeling the coffee shop, I wanted to plan ahead as much as possible. I added a ton of space on the working area, plenty of space to place objects and add possible upgrades later in the game, and 2 ways to exit. To avoid feeling trapped and to be able to use a shelf in the back that is going to be useful for storing my favorite model of the entire game, the coffee grain bag. Now that we have basically all the models for the room, it's time for the final models. The coffee making models. The models that will be seen the most, and probably the most controversial models of the game. To be honest, one of the things that keeps me up at night is the possibility of using the wrong amount of vertices when modeling. Each time I add a cylinder, I feel a huge amount of dread that I'm using too much or I'm using too little. It's like thermal paste on a computer. Every person has a different opinion on how much it needs. I know I tend to go up in the poly count, and these are no different. Starting with the espresso machine, made with round edges with individual widths, shaded smooth to see any imperfection, and made with separate panels with a small gap between them because, why not, accompanied by a glass that could look like this and harm nobody. But I was stubborn enough to try to make this pattern that looks really cool. Time will tell if these models end up making a difference in performance. And like this, after some other less important models and spending literal hours importing it to Unity, here's the final result.